Hello everyone and welcome again. In this video we're going to talk about Arnold 5.1 and the new features added. We're going to talk about the new volume shader as well as the render settings and how to use the denoiser. So in this section we're going to talk about the shader. So let's delete that. I'm going to go to the shop and create material shader builder, call this explosion, and let's dive inside. Not that. Arnold shader builder explosion, and let's drag and drop this here and let's dive inside. Now if we hit tab, there is a new, and search for a volume, there is a new one called standard volume, and this is the new basically improved version of the volume shader. And we no longer have, for example, to change or hack the transparency color to control the absorption and exit color. We also have access to color the smoke in any way we want, which was previously a bit tricky, as well as a new black body emission for the temperature. So we're going to go over all of that. Let's go to the render view. Let's make sure we create an Arnold node, and I'm going to select the explosion, make sure the camera is correct, and let's hit render. Let's make sure the resolution is 1280 by 720. And I have a very simple light rig, so it's just a flat sky dome set to 0.4 and a sunlight pointing this way set to 1.5. That's it. And let's go to the shader again. And right now, by default, it's turning on the temperature. It's using the temperature as the emission. We're going to turn that off completely and just take a look at the diffuse by itself. So this is how it looks like. We have access to the density. We have access to the scatter amount. So this is basically a multiplier on top of the color as how much light gets scattered back. This is not a density or a color multiplier. We can still change the color, and this basically will control the amount of light reflected. This controls directly the volume color, which is great. So if we ever needed to do a different smoke colored smoke, we can use that. We can drive all this information using a field, but we don't have to do that at the moment. And then we have anisotropy, which is basically the backward and forward scattering, and this is previously it exists there. And then the transparent, so this is a different section here. We control the transparent color, and basically setting this to a specific color will give us the result that we want. We don't have to do the complement anymore. And we have the scatter transparent depth, or the transparency of the volume. So the higher, the more the ray are going to travel through. This is not going to change the density of the volume at all. It's just the rays are going to be traveling through the volume more. So let's change this to something more interesting. And let's lower this to 2. And let's try the temperature. So I'm going to set this to 1. And you can see already we're getting some gradient color. It's not a flat color. So let's set this to 0.01. It's still too high. Set this one to 0.1. And you can see the temperature field that I have in the sim is quite high. So I'm going to reduce the emission. Scaling down the temperature. So this black body input is using the temperature value to generate a color. The higher the temperature, the brighter the color. The darker the temperature, the more it's going to be towards the red and the darker red version. So we don't want to lower this too much, because this is used to drive the color of the to basically the black body is using this information to generate the color. And this is how it looks like. So we can add a multiplier on top of all of this, and maybe let's increase the density a bit to 5. Cool. So you can see we're getting some nice gradient from this. We can change the brightness by changing the Kelvin temperature and this is a global multiplier on top of the black body result. Cool. So this is pretty much the overall workflow. The next feature, which I personally prefer to use, is to connect our own data. So to do that, I'm going to switch to channel. I'm going to turn this off completely. I'm going to create a sample node, and we want to sample the temperature, of course. And let's connect this to the emission. So now we have that, and we have this as a multiplier. And then I'm gonna fit range. I'm gonna use a ramp to take this as an input and generate a color based on that. So I'm gonna set it to red, green, and blue. So make sure that we get full coverage of the range. Okay, and then let's connect this to the emission color. And right now you see it's mostly blue. That means the values are pretty high. So let's use a range node and fit this properly. So let's say 0 to 10. Okay, it's still pretty strong here, but I like what's happening there. So 25, 50. Yeah, I think 50 is good. Let's try 40. And we can, instead of using this, we can use a ramp. A different ramp that replicates the actual fire color. So let's try this. Let's try something like this. And let's make this go darker. And I think the transparency is confusing us, so let's desaturate this. Also reduce the amount. And now we have some cool temperature going. Let's change this to have more yellow tint. And maybe this towards the red as well. And this is darker. So something like this. And the other thing, now we've lost the black body feature. So what we can do is we can create a separate node called black body, and we can plug in the temperature input, and this is going to generate a color back to us. Let's try the original input. Okay, let's try 100. Let's try to multiply the input. Sometimes the range needs to be really high for this to function. Yeah. So let's set this back to 1. And let's set this to 100. So now we're getting the colors from the Kelvin, from the black body pattern or information. And this could be, we can also use the remap version and multiply that to so that it has enough amplitude for this to function, because it needs high value. It doesn't work with low range values. So we could do something like this. And then instead of using the default temperature, we can plug that into a ramp as usual, like we did previously. So we can do this for all these guys. And instead of using this exact ramp, we can clip the top part, which is the super bright area, and this will give us that nice rim or nice clamp. And we can add more changes here as well. So let's do a couple more variations like this. And now we're driving the color from the black body itself. Cool. So we can go back to the emission color here and use our ramp. And maybe add a different color that has a brighter yellow. I'm not going to go too much into the artistic parts because I think that pretty much that's covered already. And I'm going to talk about the render settings, which are very much the same. We still have the volume depth, so that's that didn't change, and then we're gonna have some sampling controls that we're gonna talk about in the next video. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in a bit.